Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give you a few moments to settle in. Thank you for joining us today for this important webinar.
And the sound of the sirens, the cry of the morning. The trade union leaders, the writers.
Y'all for joining us today. You were joined by, or welcomed by the sound of Christy Moore and his song No Time for Love. And we'll play another one of his songs on the way out of this webinar. Please drop in the chat where you're calling in from. What brings you here today? We have time at the end for some question and answer, so please think about things that you'd like to know. Ask our esteemed panelists here. My name is Nadia Tonus, and I'm the Deputy Director here at Honor the Earth, and I'm joined by Crystal Tubles, who is the Executive Director of Honor the Earth, and Maeve McLaughlin, who is the Director of the Bloody Sunday Trust. And we are really, really excited to host this conversation together on the upcoming delegation, some of the goals for the Native and Irish delegation, and also reviewing some of the history of Native American and Irish solidarity. We know that this is a moment in our history as a global community where fascism and the rise of the right is on the rise. It's a difficult time also when there's so many problems impacting each of our communities, our cities, our nations and tribes, to really figure out what our priorities are and how to be effective organizers. But one thing that as an organization that is fighting on the front lines of extraction, data centers, and generative AI, what we call the death cycle of AI, we also are an organization committed to the connection of people, solidarity between different communities undergoing different struggles, but fighting along the same principles for a better world and a just world for all of us. And so, with that, you'll note that there is an AI policy that we have. We do not allow any sort of AI recording or usage of AI during our sessions. So, please turn those features off. If you have them, if you need any help, you can message Lala in the chat and they will help you. And this, of course, is also a fundraiser. So we want to join the educational aspect with our fundraising goals. We are sending 10 delegates from the so-called United States, from different Native nations, organizers here, to Derry in the north of Ireland. And we've reached half of our goal. So thank you all so much for supporting this delegation and for putting your funds towards this effort. And you all will notice that it does cost money to send the delegates, but we've also tried to keep the funds humble, low. It really is about being able to make important connections. We'll talk more about that. So right now we've raised 6,000 and we have 6,000 more dollars to go. So our hope is that through this webinar, we'll be able to raise some of those funds, and also that you who are watching will be able to send this pledge to others who might want to support this long lineage of Irish and Native solidarity into this moment, 2026. So with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Crystal and Maeve, to introduce yourselves, to introduce the Bloody Sunday Trust. Maeve, what is it? Why is it so important? And I'll say for myself, I was really, really lucky to actually go to Derry twice over the last 2 years, and to be hosted by the Bloody Sunday Trust in 2025, to be part of a delegation in 2024 that was focused on the matter of Palestine. And so this is a really exciting opportunity to be able to build on some of that and those connections. And just want to thank you, Maeve, so much for hosting us in Derry, and for inviting us to share also our struggle and the work that we are doing here with the people of Derry and with the families of the Bloody Sunday Trust. So, Crystal, I'll pass it to you first and then pass it to you, Maeve, for your introduction.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Almost good afternoon for a lot of folks, I guess. We're around that hour. I know for Maeve, it's good evening over there. So yeah, I'm really excited to see everyone here. Really thankful as well for Maeve. My name's Crystal Tubles. I'm Oglala Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, calling in from Northern Cheyenne Territory in southeastern Montana. I'm the executive director of Honor the Earth, and kind of spearheading the Native delegation to Ireland, to Derry specifically. So really excited to be here today, and I'll share a little bit more about some of my own experiences and yeah, just why I'm really excited for this conversation. So passing it to you, Maeve.
Thank you, Nadia and Crystal, and welcome everyone. Thank you for hosting this conversation. We're really excited. We're really excited to be able to host this delegation in Derry in the north of Ireland. We have a long connection, and I think that this delegation is about exploring that international solidarity and looking at actions that collectively we can do with each other. So, as Nadia said, my name is Maeve. I'm director of the Bloody Sunday Trust. The Bloody Sunday Trust is a charity. It was formed in 1997 to campaign for public inquiry into the murders of 13 people and a further 14th on the streets of the city who were marching against internment and for civil rights. And certainly the impact of Bloody Sunday on my childhood and many of my generation was a real catalyst for years and years of conflict. It was certainly my first experience of British injustice. And it certainly led me on a path that questioned, in this case, why our place was colonized, why our country had been invaded, why our country was partitioned, why there was no justice, and all that takes you to. The trust, I suppose, in does a lot of work around obviously the campaign for public inquiry and supporting the families through that process, right up to just late last year when there was one British soldier who was in court. He never went to prison. But there's still a process of supporting families when they're looking at the person who murdered their loved one hiding behind the curtain. But as important for us, it's about using that lived experience that we have around that massive injustice, and how we use that lived experience and the lessons and learnings for other places. So we work under, I suppose, the theme or banner of one world, one struggle. And we're very clear that our struggles are all interconnected and that where we can use our voice or our platform or our story for somewhere else in the world where that injustice has taken place or inequality has taken place, then we will do so. And we will do so with great vigor. So this is the third Derry Peace and Conflict International week that we will host in the city. And we've the previous two have been really, really, I suppose, powerful in many ways for all of us. And I think, there's learning experiences in all of these as well, but they are about actions. They are about, that building that international solidarity. But what can somewhere like Derry do? How can the Bloody Sunday families or the Bloody Sunday Trust use our voice to highlight the situation that you all live in currently? And I think, part of this is about taking that learning. I want to learn. I want to learn as an Irish woman. I want to learn as an Irish Republican woman. I want to understand your story and the challenges, and so that we can collectively do something. So yes, we are really excited about it, and we can talk more about the detail of it. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, May, for joining us. And for those of you who have just joined, welcome. We're starting to get into our conversation a bit about the history of Native and Irish solidarity, and also, why this delegation at this moment. So actually, Crystal, I'm going to pass it back to you. Why this delegation at this moment? Why does it feel like a priority? And what are some of the hopes that you have for learnings and connections on this delegation work to bring back for Native communities and also for our Irish relatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot happening. It seems like a very simple question, but it's actually a really big question. I think there's the historical context, right, of what Native folks have experienced on these lands in so-called US, right, for Turtle Island. And I think, we live with the symptoms and the repercussions of settler colonialism every single day. Right. We live within these structures that were created, built on top of white supremacy, on top of settler colonialism, and so that's one thing I think that I think about in this moment is like we're in this current administration, we're seeing a lot more like repression, right? We're starting to feel that, and it's starting to get closer to home, I think, especially in Native communities, because we have this idea that, or this misconception, I'll say, that things that happen internationally or on the national scale don't impact us on our own lands, right? But it's not true. And I think, that comes from being oppressed for so long, right? It comes from living in poverty and living in a settler colonial state for so long, is that we get into survival mode, right? Like a lot of our peoples and our communities are so busy just trying to put food on the table, just trying to like meet their needs, their basic needs in the community, just trying to take care of each other, trying to be safe, like all these really basic things that are going on in our own communities, that we don't see how what's the decisions being made on a national front, our state front, regional front, national front, and even an international front impact us directly. it impacts our everyday lives and our living. And so I think some of the reasons why this delegation in this moment is because I also was on the delegation with Nadia a couple years ago, specifically around Palestine, and I was really honored to be invited as a Native person in solidarity, both with Ireland and also with Palestinian relatives. Um, but I really learned a lot. I mean, I was extremely humbled by the amount of knowledge that was shared and the amount of giving to us during that time. But I think the biggest thing is to really, for me, the biggest draw was around, really looking at Ireland. Their colonialism started like what, 900 plus years ago, right? And that was something that hit me hard because over here in the so-called US, when we talk about our struggle, we frame it within the last like 500 plus years, right? And that feels like such a long amount of time, and it is. But whenever I really like zoomed back and I looked at the fact that, wow, like these relatives have been going through this for 900 plus years, and these are all of the lessons that they have learned. These are all of the struggles that they've gone through, and this is where they are today and still fighting and still pushing. It was really humbling to hear that story and to hear individual stories, right? Like how individual families were impacted, how individual, like it changed the trajectory of different people's lives. And I relate to that. Like I understand that. Like I didn't go looking for fights. I didn't go looking for what I was going to commit my life to or any of that. Like things were placed in my path. And oftentimes they were things out of my control and they were fights that were out of my control. But I had choices to either pick up that fight or to sit back and just let things happen. And I think like I related to that with that fighting spirit of our relatives there. And that was something that just really was pulled to, like I was drawn to that. And I think the relationship of land, I seen that, and I think the use of culture and language as a way to resist was also something that really deeply like resonated with me, and I felt just within my own spirit of how we carry ourselves, how we conduct ourselves. And so I just related to a lot, and I learned so much about struggle, and I learned so much about how we move through these things, the complexities, the pragmatism, all the different dynamics, the contradictions that we have to live with on a daily basis. All of these things I learned there. And not to say I wasn't learning these in other spaces, but it just kind of all came together. And it was in a way where I was like, wow, like 900 years, 500 years, like this is also my struggle, right? And I'm someone that does that. I carry things in that way. Once I commit to a fight and I commit to a struggle, like that's what it is. That's what I carry in every day of my life. And that's what happened when I went to Ireland, right? And I was in Derry, as I was able to feel that, and now I carry that as mine. And so when I came home, and even before we left, I touched base with Maeve, and I was like, man, like this would be really good to have Native folks come out here and also learn these lessons and to just experience this and to like feel it. I'm someone who really like I being on the very specific land and hearing the stories that changes things. It's very different from reading a book. It's different from watching a documentary. It's different from just reading about it, on social media and things. Like you have to go there and feel it. And as Native peoples, that's what we do, is we have that relationship to the land. And so I think in taking a delegation there, my hopes is that these folks can feel that. They will feel what I felt. They will build those relationships and those connections that I was able to. And then from that point, be able to build from that. It's like, how do we support each other in real time right now? We're all experiencing so many different things, so many attacks on so many different fronts, whether it's data centers, whether it's an attack on language, whether it's the invisibility, whether it's the whole broad systematic structure of like colonialism that we're living in, right? Whatever it might be, where we have all of these different fights. And I think we have to get really clear on like lessons learned from each other. We have to get really clear on like, okay, like what do we do today? How can we support? How do we show up? Because at the end of the day, these struggles do impact each other. We do know that. We do know that we have allies in other places. We do have relationships. And in a bit here, we'll show a timeline of some of the different instances of where Irish and Native folks showed up for each other historically. This isn't a new struggle. When I talk about Palestine, I always go into the historical context and talk about like how long our peoples have been related, how long we have been showing up for each other. And that's not new here either. it's new to me and I learned it while I was in Ireland, but our peoples have been showing up for each other consistently throughout history. And we share the struggle and we share resistance, and now we can share a path forward. And that's one thing I really appreciate about Bloody Sunday Trust is just the one world, one struggle framework. It reminds me of my mentor, Tupac Enrique. He talked about those things too, and he framed things like that as well. And so I'm really thankful for the opportunity to be able to build a future together and figure out like what is it we're actually fighting for and how do we support each other to get there. And that's my hopes for the delegation, is that it plants those seeds within everyone, whether it's folks over there or whether it's folks that are coming from here, that it plants those seeds and that we continue to build from that moment, and that we continue to build that solidarity even stronger than it has already been historically. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Crystal. I think, Maeve, I want to ask you sort of what do you think dairy can teach the world? Like you say, one world, one struggle. Crystal, you talked about some of the hopes for Native people to be able to come to Derry and to see part of themselves perhaps in the Irish struggle, but also to be able to bring your own history around your community struggles around language preservation, around culture, around the ability to actually persist in the face of colonialism and now increasing repression. I think Maeve, one of the things that struck me from Derry when I visited, and when Crystal and I visited, was just how besieged Derry still is, right? You talk about the process of inquiry. Sometimes colonialism entrenches itself in ways that we don't see. They're not right in front of you, right? So when you talk about the criminalization or the ghettoization of a people based on who you are and how you were born, we understand it in our own context, I think. As a Palestinian, I know how that shows up, what that means for me. I think going to Derry, it was really, really powerful to see the opportunity, I think, of how you guys have taken the question of justice after hundreds of years of wrongdoing, how you have taken the question of liberation and unity of an island of people in the face of a lot of deterrent. I think, even in some of the xenophobia and issues, the things that we saw in Belfast last month. I mean, I think you all do a wonderful job of being able to talk about the contemporary struggles on the island of Ireland with the historical wrongdoings against the Irish people and what it means to sort of build forward. So I want to remind those of you who are watching, thank you for joining us. This is also a fundraising webinar. We're trying to fundraise for the other half of the delegates to be able to attend this delegation. We have $6,000 more to go. I've been notified that some of you have given as we're going through the webinar. We'll make sure to tally those up. But please send out this pledge to your friends and also give a donation if you can. Amplify information about the delegation. We will also be reporting back from the ground. So Maeve, I wanted to pass it to you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Nadia. I mean, I think firstly, it's about that, what we can give as a place or as a people. It's about that shared experience of colonialism, I think, first and foremost, because we're of places and times where not everybody will accept that. And people will try to, write that out of history. So there's the first learning is around that shared experience of cultural suppression, because as Irish people we know, and as you all know, you experienced the loss of land, political control, language and cultural traditions under colonial rule. So at a very basic level, what we can do is amplify that to say this has been our experience and this is your experience, and that's a powerful place to be. I think also, and I know that you're going to go into the timeline, but I suppose we need to be pragmatic about this as well. And when you guys were over, we had to give our heads a shake, because I'm living in a place that is not national self-determination yet. I'm totally convinced that where we're moving to is an island of equals, an island where that cherishes all the children of the nation equally, that everybody's rights and are upheld in a proper, robust human rights framework. But we're not there yet. I see very much where we are as a position of transition. But when you guys were here, you very kindly reminded us that we're still living in some places with the trappings of British colonial systems. And, in many ways you can move on and not see it. Like our civic building in Derry has still very much the trappings, the bust of whoever Queen, British Queen it is, and you ignore it. So there is that we can keep ourselves grounded, and right up to the practical workings now of the work that you guys are all doing around data centers, and social and environmental justice. How can we assist in that process as well? And how can we learn from where your day-to-day challenges are? So I think as well as the shared solidarity, there's a huge learning. But the shared solidarity is critically important because we come from a place that, and certainly in the Irish context, where the conflict in Ireland was portrayed and still is in many quarters as simply some kind of religious conflict where one religious tribe didn't like another religious tribe, and that was not the picture. So when we come from a place like that, it is critically important that we get our allies together, that we amplify that voice, that we put it out, and that we look at actions flowing from it. And, it's not one size fits all as well. I think that's a really important message. And, that was very apparent with our engagement, particularly with the Palestinian-led delegation as well, that, language, we're talking about truth recovery, we're talking about peace process, and Palestinian people are nowhere near that space. So language is critically important, giving ourselves a shake and keeping ourselves grounded, but then looking at the flow of actions that we can take from it. And that's incredibly powerful because I do think this, as much as we are absolutely in this world challenged by disinformation, misinformation, and the rise of the far right, that there are more and more people like yourselves, that are coming to this space and are saying, I want to shine a spotlight on what happened. I want to understand the context of my place and my life in it. And I want to hold systems to account. And I do believe that the touchpin for that has been Palestine. I think people have been incredibly, particularly young people, have been incredibly politicized as a result of what they have witnessed. And that's never going to change. That is never going to change. That's a generational change. Now, we need more of that, of course we do, but that's a huge strength. And I know you will talk about the timeline, but even the connections with you folk and us in Ireland, we had this delegation in 1985 come to Derry to march on the Bloody Sunday, march to commemorate the people dead. So that's, right back to, the time of the so-called famine, which in my view was genocide in 1800. Our peoples were connected. So there's a real power in that. But there's also, and I think Crystal, when you were here, really got that there is a need to be pragmatic as well. There is a need to look at scenarios and deal with scenarios on their own merit without losing your ethos or strategic objective. I think that's critically important. Yeah, so there's a lot of learning for all of us, I do think.
Yeah. And everything you say, Maeve, and everything you're saying, Crystal, there's a whole conversation to be had. I noticed actually that there are quite a few people in the chat who are stating that they either have Irish heritage or have recently gone to Ireland for delegation, to rewalk some of their own ancestry. People who are married to Irish people. I myself am Irish and Palestinian, so I have one parent from each. And it's just really, I think actually it's interesting because Ireland has had such many crossroads with different struggles in different communities throughout the world. Also because Ireland is an island where the majority of its people are outside of the island itself. And we know that living in the so-called United States, where there is a large amount of Irish ancestral people, and we know that that's also a very convoluted history, and it's one that I think those of us who have Irish heritage, have Irish blood, it's important to talk about the progressive and the revolutionary, the courageous history of the Irish people, in a world where we also have, unfortunately, the participation of Irish in some of the highest police unions or, other sort of professions or areas that have been used in order to actually perpetuate the violence of the American state. So, there's always contradictions here. I remember, if you could show the timeline, please, I'll get into some of these pieces. Some of the history that we are taught, I think, and maybe those of you who are on the call, you can actually write in the chat, are there any other moments here that are not on this timeline? I mean, we know very well this story of famine. And as Maeve, you mentioned, the famine was not a naturally occurring thing, right? The famine was a man-made thing in order to starve and punish the Irish, in order to actually depopulate the island, which was living under, and the Irish people were living under one of the most feudal systems in the entirety of so-called Europe, right? And so the stories of the famine that are coming out today, I think, really show the lineage of the importance of struggle for land, right? Landlordness, the way that Irish people were shipped off to Australia because they were poor, unable to pay their taxes, and or were in areas where they simply needed to be gone. They were starved. We were starved. And that leads to a large number of Irish people in the so-called United States and Australia who came as settlers, actually coming from the history of famine. So famine Irish. So in 1847, the famine was being ignored by most of the countries in Europe. It was under the rule of the British Empire, the monarchy. And this was part of policy, right? So while we have narratives that the Irish were too stupid to grow anything other than potatoes, the only food available was potatoes, we know that this was a man-made crisis. And the Choctaw Nation, all the way here in the so-called United States, across the ocean, they actually pulled from their own pockets as people who had experienced a lot of suffering, death, man-made famine, and were removed from parts of their heritable territory. They were actually gave to the Irish to be able to buy food, to be able to sustain themselves. And this is an act of one nation, but it's something that has actually proliferated as a story over time, I think, in many, many of our consciousness. In 1990, Choctaw leaders actually visited Ireland and participated in the first famine walk, which commemorated the tragedy of, and actually sort of like a trail of tears in some ways. As we're saying, these things rhyme, that doesn't mean they're the same, but in the famine as well, when Irish people were removed from their land due to harsh conditions, they went walking to areas where they could find food. And many of them were turned away. Many of them were massacred on the spot. The Choctaw people and the nation continued to really honor this connection, and seeing the plights of the Irish people in the late 1800s very similarly to their own, and as relatives who required support. And this is one aspect of international solidarity. In 1992, the Irish nationals participated in the Trail of Tears Memorial Walk with the Choctaw Nation. And you can see many different aspects, 2017 and other, there's lots of songs actually that were written about this moment. You see the Eternal Heart sculpture in Oklahoma that was unveiled in relationship to a sculpture that was made called the Kindred Spirit sculpture in Ireland. And then many of you all remember in 2020, there was the COVID pandemic. And actually, I remember this very well because I was a participant and also a regional coordinator for this campaign. Irish people in the United States donated over $3 million to the Diné or the Navajo and the Hopi nations during the COVID-19 pandemic when they were at the center of COVID. So this moment when New York City was in the headlines, but the Diné and the Hopi were not. And this was a major sort of moment of a reorganization of moving from this historic solidarity and historical memory that, yes, the Diné, the Hopi, representing that these are Native people who need Irish support in the same way that the Choctaw supported the Irish people. And really, actually, a powerful moment where I saw lots of people self-organize in a moment when all of us were experiencing really, really difficult challenges, rise up and say, this is a reclamation of our Irish history, this is a reclamation of our Irish responsibility, and this is how we will help our Native relatives in a moment when the state has abandoned them or when they have been condemned because of their historic conditions on the reservation to die. Right? And so that was a really, really powerful moment. There's another example here of the Irish national lacrosse team giving up their spot in the World Lacrosse Championships to the Haudenosaunee, to the Iroquois Confederacy, and a joint team of players from the Mohawk, Onondaga, Oneida, Cayuga, and Seneca and Tuscarora nations, which had not been invited, actually were able to take the Irish's position because, and as you all know, the Haudenosaunee and the Iroquois Confederacy, they actually travel on their own tribal passports, right? And so they are able to travel to other nations as a nation unto themselves. And this is something where Irish people were able to challenge on a very important concept of sovereignty. So these are really some tight examples. But I think we highlight them here because they're important. It shows really in the face of death what it means to not just isolate yourself into your own struggle, but to connect with others. I think also in the moment of like sports and culture, what it means to actually be able to tell a story or to represent yourself and be recognized as a sovereign nation. Maeve, you talked about like the historic inaccuracy about the conflict in Ireland being an issue of two kind of religious tribes being at odds with each other rather than telling it like it is, which is a history of colonialism. And I think you're quite right in the fact that, each of our struggles, have taken a different path towards liberation. But one of the ones that the Irish struggle has taken is in the path and the demand is really a unified Ireland. And that, I think we have a question in the chat about some of the race riots in Dublin and in Belfast. I wonder if you could speak to maybe the way that the history of Irish people fighting for rights on your own island and to be equal citizens also connects to this new flood of, or this new arrivals of people coming from different countries who have experienced colonialism and repression, and their communities who are coming to Ireland to search for a home, and what it means to try and build an island for all of its people, all of its children, including those who are coming as guests, those who are coming in order to live with Irish people side by side.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I suppose just when you see all of that on the screen, it's incredibly powerful, the connections. And I think for me as well, just reflecting on the timeline of what you've just shown, the, the Indigenous communities to raise money during, 1847 and what was called the famine, at a time when people there had suffered so much. I mean, just years earlier. Do you think that, all of that suffering through that trail of tears, as it became known, and all of that was almost, I'm not saying put to the side, but people prioritized giving money to Ireland. That's incredibly powerful. And I did make reference to the two guys who joined us in 1985 as well to, come to the city to speak on the platform in Derry during the Bloody Sunday commemoration, to show that solidarity, to meet with the family. So those links are incredibly strong, and it gives me a lot of hope just looking at it mapped out like that. But yes, I mean, I suppose it's one of the contradictions in our own struggle, in that many people were forced off this land, um, economically, politically, culturally, to go and find lives elsewhere. A lot of them to the so-called US, and it saddens me to say, but some of those people now prop up, the very kind of far right system that is in place. And I suppose ultimately it does become about power and class and all of those things, but I scratch my head when I think, Irish people who knew this, who experienced racism, who experienced all of that wherever they were forced to go to, and yet have become some of the people, and obviously not saying all of them, who are propping that up and propping that agenda up and following that guy in the White House, and all that goes with that. But here's the thing: that's not all of us, is the first thing. Certainly my view is that the far right, it's a project, and I think we have to view it as that. It is a project. It is a well organized project. And we have seen, various attempts in recent blatant racism in communities across the north and across the island. And what you often find with all of this is it is connected to one, quite often, more times than not, one particular identity. And that is, for the most part, you will find it within, if you like, loyalists or British communities who identify as being British, or as maintaining a connection with Britain. And most of the hate crimes and race crimes have happened within those communities. So there is a hard conversation to take place there. And on the positive, there's my dog as well. We do some work around training for anti-racism. So we developed a charter, an anti-racism charter, that we take into schools, that we take into businesses, that we take into youth clubs, that we take into places of work, and we try to get people to sign up to it. It is not the panacea to all of our ills, but it is a statement of the place that we're in. I do think that constitutional change gives us a huge opportunity, because constitutional change and the right for national self-determination across the island of Ireland allows us to put in place the legislation, the human rights framework that cherishes all of the people, all of the children of this nation equally. And I think we have a real opportunity. We're a small island. We have a real opportunity to do that and make sure that everyone who inhabits this island has the right to their identity, their allegiance, but their right to be cherished and protected in law. And sorry about my dog in the background.
We can't even hear him,
Or
Thanks, Maeve. Crystal, I saw you nodding. I think you have something to add.
Um, Oh yeah, I was laughing about the dog. I also have dogs that bust in the doors all the time whenever and of course it's always when we're live on panels. But yeah, I was just thinking, like when Maeve mentioned like the pragmatism and the way that hit me on the delegation. Like I remember coming home and I talked to you, Nadia, about it, where I was frustrated with my own people because I felt like, man, like I feel like there's still so much clarity about like a united Ireland, and that is still the goal, that is still the fight, like that is still where things are moving towards. It's just a matter of like what tactic, what strategy, like how are we going to get there, right? And I was so frustrated because I feel like the biggest thing with my own people is like there's so many of us, but I'm just like, man, like some of us really believe that like we're going to vote ourselves out of this. We're going to vote ourselves out of settler colonialism. We're going to vote ourselves out of all of the oppression that we've been experiencing and whatnot. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against voting, right? Like it's one tactic, it's one route. But I still feel like the other thing is that some of us are like, we just need to be like good Indians, right? We need to be good little Indians and we just need to follow the rules and like play by the playbook and stick to that. And like that'll get us there. That'll move us there. And a lot of that comes from boarding schools, right? Because of the experience that our peoples and our elders have had at boarding school in terms of like, I mean, they were abused, the level of abuse and the violence and the emotional assault, the sexual assault and the physical assaults that they experienced for simply being who they were as Native people, for speaking their language, right? For knowing their culture, for having a relationship to the land. The violence that they experienced taught them it's not okay to be Native, right? It's not okay to be who we are. And so if they survived boarding schools and they came back to our communities, that mentality of that fear of experiencing that violence when they didn't follow the rules, like it got passed down generationally, right? And so I see our own people struggle with that. And so we tend to just be good Indians and just follow the rules. Don't push back. Don't question this. Don't bring up that past. Don't bring up that experience. And it's frustrating for me because for me, my end goal is still to see my people as sovereign people on our own lands, to have our relationship with our own lands, speaking our own language, having our own governments, having our own legal infrastructures, having all of these things for ourselves, right? To govern our own relationships and to be able to have a say of what those relationships look like to each other, right? And I think that was really frustrating for me when I came home because I was like, man, like we need that. Like we need what our Irish relatives have been able to maintain was so inspiring to me, but it created that frustration. But what it also did was like, okay, like being frustrated doesn't help anything. Like, what am I doing about it? And like that was the question that I quickly shifted into. And like also it made me sit back and assess where our peoples are at and what we've been through. And so like we have 574 different federally recognized Native nations here, all in a singular land base of the so-called US, right? And that's just who's federally recognized. It doesn't include state recognized, that doesn't include tribes that have been erased or invisibilized, all of that, right? And so what it did is it pushed me to have more compassion for my people, but also to think about like, well, how do we remedy that? How do we move forward? How do we build that and push our people beyond that fear? And so this delegation is one of those steps, right? It's a practical way that we can address that and we can actually learn and we can grow and we can push beyond the fear of what happens when we do push back. And that is something that's very prevalent in this current administration right now as well. The repression that's happening, the repression that's still coming, like that is all there. And so I think we have to be able to learn from each other and to build with each other and build that relationship because, up until more recently, the recent years, my people were less than 1% of the total population. I think we may have advanced. We might be like 1.5 or like we might be hitting 2% now on our own lands. So we don't win these fights by sheer numbers alone. We don't. We don't have that. But what we can do is build with all of our other relatives who have experienced colonialism, oppression, violence, all of these things globally around the world. And then when we come together, we are not the minority, right? We are stronger that way. And so I think that was something that really came from the delegation that I was able to participate on that I really want to drive home whenever we go back and we take more folks there. But also just in terms of bringing it to current, I know Nadia had a question around currently right now where Onto the Earth is we're fully embedded in the fights against the hyperscale data centers, right? And I think it's a global fight. The so-called US is not the only one engaging, but they are also exploiting and taking advantage of lands globally to be able to push forward. And we're basically all pawns in this large techno-feudal battle. And we hear it on the news. I heard this current administration specifically saying that whoever has the most advanced generative AI will win, right? And that's their thinking. And so in order to have the generative AI, you have to have the hyperscale data centers to house all of the data that's being created, the new data that's being created, right? And then from there, they have to have critical minerals, right? You have to have critical minerals to be able to create the GPUs, to create the servers, all of that. That impacts our relatives globally. Where do we think that these critical minerals come from? Because they're not 100% coming from domestic sources here in the so-called US, they're coming from global communities, right? Our relatives in the Congo currently being paid $3 a day to live down inside of these mines, to mine cobalt, to mine the different minerals that are needed for these hyperscale data centers, right? In the extreme conditions that they live under. And we know that our relatives in the Philippines, they're being forced to watch and to view extreme and horrific scenes to filter out what's real and what's not. And so it's just like everyone globally is being impacted by these things, right? And then if they do push towards domestic mining, where do we think that's going to happen? We already have a long legacy of uranium and all of these minerals being targeted for native lands. We sit on deposits, right? Our lands are on top of these deposits of uranium, lithium, graphite, copper, all of this, right? And they're going to come for that. I think the other thing too is really looking at the fact that, you have to power that somehow, right? And so now looking at nuclear or extending the life of the coal industry or even expanding frack gas to power these things. And then the fast tracking of nuclear, right? And so we're watching that all play out, and that's all happening towards surveillance, towards militarism. And militarism is global, right? That is something that impacts everyone. And so that's something to think about in this current moment of how we're carrying that. And that was something that we named and we had talked about with Maeve, is like, how do we build together in this current moment to talk about that? Because I know that they are also being targeted there, right? There's also hyperscale data centers sucking up resources, wasting water, contaminating the air, impacting the land, creating heat islands of up to 16 degrees hotter, right? This is happening on those lands as well, in addition to here in Indian country and other urban and rural communities, right? And so trying to connect our current struggle right now, that's just the most recent fight. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be other iterations of these fights that are coming. We're taking on the hyperscale data centers now, but that doesn't mean that, nuclear on native lands isn't the next big fight for us as well, because they have to power these. And so really looking at that, how do we do our part here? And then how do we reach across the waters and really build that relationship, build that solidarity, and figure out how do we do this? Because we have more power and more ability to do that in this moment. And I want to make a quick connection to language and culture really quickly. So language and culture, and I'm sure for Ireland as well, is those were some of the first things that were attacked and invisibilized and punished, right? And they tried to erase that out of us, right? In our relationship to the land. And so right now we're in a moment where our people have been in a revitalization movement, right? To reconnect to language, reconnect to our culture, to bring that back, right? All of these things. But what's happening with generative AI, to make the connection back to this hyperscale, data center fight, is that large language models, generative AI is consuming our language. It's consuming our cultural practices, our spirituality, our ceremonies, and then bastardizing it and turning around and putting it out there to the world in a way that is not okay and not acceptable and not for just general public consumption, right? And not even accurate. It's not even correct information that's getting put out there, right? And so it's really extremely scary, the level of spiritual and cultural warfare that these hyperscale data centers and generative AI creates for peoples who are reclaiming language, who are reclaiming our culture and our ceremonies and our practices and our language in relationship to the land after experiencing colonialism that tried to erase it. Right. And I think that is something that peoples across the world can relate to, indigenous peoples, other communities that have been living under colonialism. We've all been experiencing those things. Right. And so in this moment, this is almost like a new era, right, of colonialism, of what we're experiencing when it comes to the new attack on our culture, on our language, on our spirituality, on our relationship to the land. And so I just wanted to connect that that piece of like, we will also be having those conversations of current struggles that we are experiencing right now. And how do we connect that? And how do we actually like learn from this historical fight that we've both been engaged in and then build into the future in present day while still holding all of that in ourselves, right? And we do that every day is we have to hold all of that stuff inside of our bodies. And so if we can at least hold that together, then we're stronger for it and we can actually win, right?
I think if I could, yeah, thank you, Crystal, because the first thing that resonates with me when you talk about, frustration at one stage with your people. Same here. I mean, the same here. There's so many Irish people who accepted the kind of the traditional narrative, or for sometimes understandable reasons, to try to bring up their children or put their head down and get on with their life, and that that is frustrating, and and that was greatly aided by the likes of churches and the Catholic Church, who take your lot and do not challenge, and certainly do not fight back. Because if you fight back, you're not going to a very nice place, and all of that, and how they dealt with the armed conflict, how they dealt with armed struggle, how you weren't allowed to bring the Irish tricolour into, funerals and churches and all, and so there is an absolutely piece of work that we have to do as well, to say that it is okay to have those conversations. Let's draw that out. Because the thing about this is that in most Irish people, if you scratch the surface, you get the history, you get their view that this country was invaded. You get it, it's there. But some people, for good and bad reasons, decided to be quiet about it. So it's the same, is what I'm saying. It's similar to what you're feeling there. Um, and then there was something else in my head that just, yes, I think for us as part of this delegation too, is looking at language, and looking at language as a tool of resistance. Because a lot of our learning as well came from the prisons. So it came from the political prisoners. Um, a lot of you mean the Irish language would have been used in the prisons as a tool of resistance, as maintaining your kind of discipline, maintaining your structures, because the British prison guards, officers, screws as they were called, didn't understand it. So prisoners were able to communicate in all sorts of ways from outside in, as well as reclaiming their own language. And that's a very powerful, and this delegation, we will hear directly from two former political prisoners about that language as a tool of resistance from the prisons to the outside, and how that's maintained. And that's really, really, really important as well. And the reclaiming of the language as well, and the reclaiming of our, our culture, our music, our song, our spirit in many ways. But listening to you, Crystal, I can see where there are just so many similarities. We have challenges within as well that we just have to be mindful of. But I go back to the point about the opportunity, and the opportunity that we have on this island to get this right, and to get that done in a way that never again will one person's rights be suppressed, oppressed, stood on, where people have no redress. Those days are gone, and then in the course of that, if I have to be a persuader, if I have to persuade my neighbor or my friend who identifies as British, that is absolutely fine. The day after a border poll in this island, and they want to identify as British, totally, absolutely within their right. But it will be the same right as my right to be Irish, no more and no less. So there's a real opportunity to get this right. And I think more and more people on the island of Ireland are coming to that point as well, where they realise that constitutional change is something that's actually within our reach. And then how we keep ourselves grounded in the context of all of that, that we don't forget about our friends who are struggling internationally, that we don't forget about where our focus should be, that we don't forget, like people who emigrated for all sorts of reasons and forgot. We have to maintain that focus, that international solidarity focus.
Yeah, well said. Um, Thank you all. Thank you, Maeve. Thank you, Crystal. And thank you to our tech team on the back end for putting this webinar together. Thank you all so much who are in attendance for joining us here today, for spending an hour of your Friday with us. And we're really, really excited to be able to build from the relationships that we've highlighted, the conversations, understanding into a full-blown delegation to Derry of 10 Native organizers to the north of Ireland. Thank you so much for your support. I'd like to announce that we have raised almost $1,800 in this hour, which supports a delegate and a half to attend the delegation. So thank you all so much. We now have 5 delegates. We can now book a 6th ticket and we'll work towards our 7th. Please, if this moved you, if you feel like you've learned something, and if you are interested in learning about the gains of the delegations, please sign up for our newsletter so that you will get the report back. Please send this to friends who you think will be interested. If they're able to support, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us and for the energy in the chat. And thank you, Maeve and the Bloody Sunday Trust, the families of the Bloody Sunday Trust, for reaching out from Derry to those of us in the rest of the world. We are really, really excited to join you in a couple of weeks. Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
And we'll end with the voice of Christy Moore.
Thank you, everyone.
Wicklow. And people here from all over the world, from fucking Motherwell and Hamilton and everywhere.